In 2016, a prison door opened in Louisiana. A man stepped toward it. Sunlight poured through the frame. The hallway beyond was empty, quiet, waiting. He stood there for a long moment. Then he turned around. After 43 years in solitary confinement, longer than most people spend in a career, longer than some marriages, longer than entire lifetimes in some parts of the world, Albert Woodfox was offered his freedom. And for a few seconds he hesitated. Not because he didn't want it, but because freedom, after that long, had become a foreign language. This is the story of what happens when the mind adapts to a cage, and why sometimes leaving it is the hardest thing of all. Solitary confinement is designed to break you. A cell, 6 by 9 feet, 23 hours a day, no human contact, no sunlight, no sound except the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of your own breathing. It's not meant to rehabilitate, it's meant to erase. The United Nations calls it torture when it exceeds 15 days. Psychologists have documented the effects: hallucinations, memory loss, paranoia, a collapse of identity itself. Most people can't survive it for a year. Albert Woodfox survived it for 43. He wasn't a serial killer. He wasn't a terrorist. He was a young black man convicted of a murder he maintained. Until his last day in that cell, he didn't commit. His name was tied to a case that became one of the longest-running battles against injustice in American legal history. The Angola Three, a story of corruption, resistance, and survival. But this isn't a story about innocence or guilt. This is a story about what happens when a human being is placed in conditions designed to destroy him and refuses to disappear. Albert Woodfox was 25 years old when the door closed. It was 1972. Angola Prison, Louisiana, a former plantation turned maximum security facility, the largest prison in the United States, a place where men were still called by numbers, not names. He was placed in solitary confinement after the killing of a prison guard, a murder he denied involvement in. The evidence was thin. Testimonies were coerced. His conviction was overturned 3 times by federal judges. Each time the state re-indicted him, and each time he went back to the same cell. 6 by 9 feet, a steel bed, a toilet, a slot in the door for food trays, no windows, no clock, no mirror. Time stopped meaning anything. In the early years, he fought it. He shouted, he paced. He tried to count the days, but the rhythm of solitary made that impossible. There were no markers, no seasons, no Sundays or Tuesdays. Just the fluorescent hum and the metallic clang of doors opening and closing somewhere down the hall. He told himself he would get out, that justice would arrive, that someone somewhere was working to free him. But months became years, years became decades. And at some point, something inside him shifted, not broke, shifted. He stopped waiting for the world to save him. He started building a world inside the cell. Albert began to read anything he could get his hands on. Philosophy, history, political theory, Malcolm X, Frantz Fanon, Marx. He studied law. He wrote letters, thousands of them, to lawyers, activists, journalists. He created routines, exercise, meditation, mental discipline. He taught himself to control his mind the way a monk might in a monastery, because that's what solitary confinement demands. You either master your mind or it devours you. He turned the cell into a practice ground for endurance, not just physical, psychological, spiritual. And here's the thing most people don't understand about long-term isolation. It doesn't just take things from you, it gives you things too. Silence, stillness, a kind of terrible clarity. You strip away everything that doesn't matter, every distraction, every illusion about who you are or what you need. What's left is raw, unfiltered, sometimes unbearable, but it's also pure. By the time Albert Woodfox had been in solitary for 20 years, he wasn't the same man who entered. He had become someone else, not broken, not defeated, but fundamentally altered. He had learned to live without touch, without conversation, without the basic rhythms that make us feel human. He had learned to be alone in a way most people will never experience and never should. And that's when the problem began. Because in 2016, after decades of legal battles, after 3 overturned convictions, after international pressure and campaigns and protests, the state of Louisiana finally gave up. They offered him a deal: plead no contest, walk free, never come back. And on February 19, 2016, at the age of 69, Albert Woodfox left his cell. The door opened. He stepped into the hallway. People were waiting for him: lawyers, friends, cameras, faces he'd never seen before, voices offering congratulations, hands reaching out to shake his. He didn't know what to do with any of it. Later, he would describe that moment in interviews: the overwhelming sensory flood, the noise, the colors, the movement. After 43 years in a 6x9 cell, the world felt too big. He went to a restaurant, sat down, looked at a menu, and realized he didn't know how to order food anymore. He walked into a grocery store, saw the aisles stretching out in every direction, and felt panic rising in his chest. He tried to sleep in a bed, a real bed with sheets and pillows, and couldn't. It was too soft, too open, too exposed. For weeks he slept on the floor, because after 4 decades the cage had become home, and freedom felt like exile. This is what psychologists call institutionalization. But it's deeper than that. It's what happens when survival rewrites your biology, when your nervous system adapts to captivity so completely that release feels like violence. Albert wasn't afraid of the cell. He had mastered the cell. What terrified him was the world outside, a place with no structure, no walls, no rules he understood. He had spent 43 years learning how to be alone. Now he had to learn how to be human again, and no one teaches you that. Albert Woodfox spent the last years of his life traveling, speaking, writing. He became an advocate for prison reform, for the abolition of solitary confinement, for the men still locked in cells like the one he left behind. He wrote a memoir, Solitary. In it, he didn't talk much about bitterness or revenge. He talked about endurance, about the mind's ability to survive the unsurvivable, about what it costs and what it teaches. He said that solitary didn't break him, but it did change him. It made him someone who could withstand almost anything, and it made him someone who would never fully belong anywhere again. He died in 2022, free but still shaped by the cage. There's a question at the heart of this story that we rarely ask. What does freedom mean when you've spent half your life learning how to live without it? We talk about justice, we talk about release, we talk about second chances, but we don't talk about what happens to the mind after decades in a box. We don't talk about the fact that some doors, once closed, can never fully reopen. Albert Woodfox walked out of that cell, but part of him never left. Not because he was broken, but because survival required him to become something else, something that could endure, something that could adapt, something that no longer fit the shape of the world outside. And maybe that's the real cruelty of solitary confinement. Not that it locks you away, but that it teaches you to live in a place where freedom, when it finally comes, feels like the loneliest thing of all.